she was left to freeze. One little girl, skin and bones, huddled in a dirty alley with nothing but a wounded dog for warmth. Hungry, exhausted, invisible to the world. A child and her only friend fighting to survive a night no one should ever see. People passed by, heads turned away. Not a single hand reached out until he did. A weary police officer, heartbroken but not hardened, about to face a kind of battle no badge ever prepared him for. What happened next will restore your faith in humanity and remind you why hope matters. Before we start, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. I want to see how far Naomi and Rusty's story travels. And if you believe every child deserves a home, if you believe every animal deserves love, not fear, hit that subscribe button, because this story will stay with you long after it ends. The winter wind cut through Millbrook, Georgia, with the quiet ferocity of something half alive. It had snowed the night before, a rare blessing in these southern towns. So the gutters were lined with slush, the streetlights soft and haloed in mist. It was almost midnight, and the small downtown, with its shuttered storefronts and cracked sidewalks, seemed to huddle deeper into itself as the temperature dropped. Millbrook wasn't a town that loved change. Here, people locked their doors early and trusted in what they already knew. Marcus Turner, 43, walked slowly through the fogged glass of the bakery window, collar turned up against the cold. He wore jeans, old boots, and a navy jacket that made him look less like a cop and more like a tired man out for air. His salt and pepper hair was uncombed, his frame strong but slightly slumped from long days and longer memories. Marcus's face, broad and open, bore a permanent trace of sadness around the eyes, a kind of quiet patience people mistook for calm. In truth, Marcus had learned endurance the hard way. As a child, he'd been the invisible boy, always waiting for a parent who wouldn't come home, always outside someone else's window. His hand brushed a faded badge in his pocket, more out of habit than pride. He wasn't on duty tonight, just trying to walk off the ache in his chest that came every year as Christmas approached, an ache sharpened since the loss of his wife. His mother, Dorothy, had warned him about wandering the streets so late. "You can't fix the world by walking in circles, Marcus," she'd said, voice gentle but steel underneath. Still, he walked. He almost missed them in the alley behind Maple Street Grocery, tucked between two dumpsters. The girl was crouched low, skinny knees poking through threadbare leggings, her small hands red from cold. Naomi Evans couldn't have been more than 9 bone thin, skin the deep brown of pecan shells, hair braided tight against her scalp but now frizzed and dotted with bits of old leaves. Her jacket was 2 sizes too small, a man's name stitched on the inside collar, J. Evans. She wore no hat or gloves. Everything about her said she was trying to make herself smaller, to disappear. But her eyes, large, dark, fiercely awake, shone with a strange, stubborn hope. Beside her, pressed against a trash bag for warmth, was a dog big, black and tan, with the unmistakable wedge-shaped head and gold eyes of a German shepherd. The dog's coat was patchy, especially along his right hind leg, where an old wound had left a web of white scars. One ear stood tall, the other bent halfway, as if listening for mercy. The dog's ribs showed starkly through his fur, and his breath clouded in the frigid air, shallow but determined. Marcus stopped, watching them for a moment. The girl, half hidden in the shadow, froze. The dog pushed himself up, standing between her and Marcus. He gave a low, warning growl, not vicious but exhausted, as if he'd spent a lifetime protecting and had nothing left except duty. Marcus spoke softly. "Hey there. Didn't mean to scare you." No response, only the cold standoff. Naomi's arms wrapped tighter around her belly. He knelt, keeping his voice low. "It's late and freezing. Let me get you something hot to eat. There's a place around the corner. You two look like you could use it." The dog growled again, stepping forward, paw dragging slightly. There was a depth of loyalty in his body language, something Marcus recognized and respected. The kind of loyalty that didn't leave no matter how bad things got. "I'm Marcus. I'm not on duty tonight, just—" He trailed off, embarrassed by his own need to explain. Naomi's chin lifted a fraction. "You a cop?" He nodded, pulling the badge from his pocket and holding it up, no sudden movements. "Marcus Turner. My mom says I have to show my badge if I want anyone to believe me." She considered this. "We don't need trouble. I'm not here to give you any. You got a name?" She hesitated. "Naomi." Marcus glanced at the dog, who had not stopped watching him. "And who's this soldier?" Naomi looked down at her friend, the corners of her mouth twitching. "He's Rusty." The name was unexpected, Rusty, for a dog whose fur was more shadow than rust. Marcus's gaze softened. "How'd he get that name?" Naomi didn't answer right away. Her fingers curled in the dog's thick neck fur, feeling for the tiny patch of coppery hair just behind his ear, barely visible unless you looked for it. "Mama said every old thing can shine somewhere. When we found him, he was all mud and bones, but back here—" She pressed gently, and Marcus saw it. A rough swirl of reddish-brown fur like a burnished penny, hidden against the black. "He protected us," she added, so softly it was almost lost in the wind. "He never left, even when Mama was gone." Rusty looked at Marcus, eyes ancient and wary, as if weighing every memory. Marcus felt something settle in his chest, heavy and warm. He stood up, moving slowly. "There's a bench under the awning. I'll be back in a minute with soup and some water for Rusty. If you're gone when I get back, that's your choice. But I hope you're still here." He walked quickly to the corner cafe Sarah's Diner, run by Sarah Jenkins, a thick-set woman with a heart big as the Georgia sky. Sarah had gray-streaked hair and a tight bun, and wore an old blue cardigan that smelled faintly of cinnamon. She kept the lights on later than anyone, serving hot coffee to truckers and strays alike. Marcus pushed inside, ordering 2 cups of chicken noodle soup and a thermos of warm milk. Sarah didn't ask questions. She'd seen the hungry before. She simply nodded, packed extra rolls, and slid 2 dog biscuits into a napkin. "Tell whoever it is to come in if it gets colder," she said, her voice brisk but kind. "No one deserves to freeze in Millbrook, Marcus, not even a dog." When Marcus returned, Naomi and Rusty were still on the bench. He set down the food, careful not to crowd them. Rusty sniffed at the soup, then at Marcus's hand. He licked Marcus's palm once, tentative, a gesture that felt like a fragile truce. Naomi eyed the soup but hesitated. Marcus poured the milk into a cup. "It's not much, but it's warm." She took it, hands trembling. "Thank you." For a few minutes, they ate in silence. The town's Christmas lights glimmered distantly through the fog, too far away to offer any real comfort. In the background, a city bus rattled by, indifferent. Marcus glanced at the girl, her shoes nearly worn through, the Band-Aid holding the side together. "How long have you two been out here?" Naomi shrugged. "Since before Thanksgiving." He wanted to ask more, but something in her posture, stiff, defensive, told him not to push. Rusty finished his biscuit and rested his heavy head in Naomi's lap. Marcus saw the bond between them, forged in fear and pain, made unbreakable by kindness. He recognized it. He'd lived it. Finally, he said, "If you want a place to sleep tonight, the station's empty. Warm. Rusty can come too." She eyed him warily, but a flicker of hope passed through her eyes. "Can he really?" "He's part of the family, isn't he?" She nodded, tears barely contained, and stood. "We'll come." Marcus walked them to the station, feeling the first real warmth of the night hope, fragile as a bird's bone, but hope nonetheless. The Millbrook police station sat on the corner of Magnolia Avenue, its brick walls half lit by the flickering orange streetlights outside. Inside, the air was warm and filled with the faint smell of old coffee and cheap disinfectant. Marcus Turner led Naomi and Rusty through the narrow hallway, his boots echoing softly off the linoleum. He moved with deliberate calm, careful to keep his hands visible and his tone gentle, a skill honed over years of coaxing frightened strangers into safety. Naomi kept close to Rusty, one small hand resting on his back, the other clenching the edge of her jacket. Her wide, wary eyes scanned every corner, every passing shadow, her posture hunched in readiness to run if anyone moved too quickly. Rusty was the true guardian tonight. Even as the automatic doors whispered shut behind them, the big German shepherd pressed himself protectively against Naomi's side, hackles bristling, every sinew ready to spring between her and any perceived threat. The bandaged leg trembled, but his eyes never left Marcus's silhouette. They passed the front desk, where Officer Harold Jennings, a balding man with pale skin and a mustache the color of old hay, glanced up from a crossword puzzle. Jennings had worked nights for decades, his humor dry and his patience frayed by years of small-town tedium. Still, his heart was soft for the unlucky. He nodded at Marcus, eyebrows raised at the sight of the girl and the battered dog, but said nothing, just handed over a blanket from the lost and found bin and pointed them to the interview room. Inside the small room, Marcus draped the blanket around Naomi's shoulders. Rusty paced the space, inspecting every corner, sniffing at chair legs and coat racks, then returned to his post at Naomi's feet. Marcus opened a metal locker near the door, pulling out a battered dog bowl. He filled it with water, setting it down gently. "Here you go, big guy." Rusty approached the bowl warily, then lapped up the water, never taking his gaze off Marcus for long. Naomi sat stiffly in the folding chair, the blanket pooled in her lap. Marcus knelt in front of her so their eyes were level, keeping a respectful distance. "I know this place isn't home," he said quietly, "but it's safe. Nobody's going to bother you here." He paused, noticing the way her left hand always tugged her jacket collar up high on her neck. As she shifted, the fabric slipped, revealing a pale scar that curved from beneath her ear to the edge of her jaw, a thin, jagged crescent, years old, but ugly in the sterile light. Marcus's heart squeezed tight. He didn't mention it, just offered a gentle, "If you're cold, we have sweatshirts and socks in the back. You just let me know." Rusty finished the water, then pressed his head against Naomi's leg. She scratched behind his bent ear, voice low. "He doesn't like strangers. He always stands guard. Sometimes he growls even when people just walk by." "Seems like he's been through a lot," Marcus said, careful to keep his tone neutral. Naomi nodded, her gaze sliding away. "People can be mean to dogs, or to me. He knows." A knock at the door startled them both. Marcus stood and opened it a crack. On the other side stood Helen Applewhite, a petite, wiry woman in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a loose braid and cheeks red from the wind. Helen ran the corner bakery, known for her stubborn opinions and soft spot for the lost souls of Millbrook. Her husband had passed a decade ago, leaving her with memories, a faded wedding ring, and a refusal to close shop until everyone was fed. Helen held a paper sack in her gloved hands, eyes bright behind fogged spectacles. "I saw you with them," she whispered, thrusting the bag at Marcus. "You give this to that child and her dog. Tell her it's fresh from the oven, no charge. And if she's cold, my shop's open early." Then she vanished, quick as a sparrow. Marcus brought the bag inside. Naomi eyed him, skeptical, until he pulled out a still warm roll, the crust golden and flecked with rosemary. Rusty's nose quivered, but he sat, waiting for Naomi's signal. She tore off a chunk, giving half to Rusty, nibbling the rest in silence. For the first time, Marcus noticed a flicker of gratitude, a softening at the edges of her wary mask. After a few minutes, Marcus asked, "Do you have anyone I should call? A family member? Maybe a neighbor who's worried?" Naomi shook her head, lips pressed tight. "Nobody." He tried again, softer. "Where did you sleep last night?" "By the river, under the bridge," she said simply. Rusty kept watch. Marcus scribbled a note. He wanted to ask about the scar, but he knew how easily trust could be broken. Instead, he made a promise in his heart. "I'll keep them safe tonight. I'll get answers in the morning." As the hours stretched toward dawn, the station grew quieter. Jennings wandered by with a cup of cocoa, muttering, "For the girl," before shuffling back to his desk. Marcus watched as Naomi curled on the padded bench, Rusty curled at her side, her fingers tangled in his fur. Even asleep, her shoulders remained tense, as if waiting for the world to demand too much again. Outside, the sky lightened to gray. Through the window, Marcus saw Helen's bakery lights flicker on, a sign that morning, and hope was possible even in the bleakest seasons. The next morning dawned bleak, a pale wash of color over Millbrook as cold rain began to patter on the windows of the police station. Naomi awoke to the distant sound of Marcus's boots and the gentle thump of Rusty's tail. She blinked against the dim light, taking a moment to remember where she was. Clean sheets, a cup of half-finished cocoa, and the steady presence of her dog, already awake and watchful. Marcus Turner appeared in the doorway, his shoulders still broad under the worn sweater, but his eyes soft with concern. "You two sleep okay?" he asked, voice low and careful. His manner was always gentle, as if each word might startle her. Naomi just nodded. Her voice, still unsure, was barely a whisper. It was warm. Rusty, feeling the relaxed tension in the room, gave Marcus a slight thump with his tail. The big dog looked brighter this morning, though his limp was still noticeable. By mid-morning, Marcus had arranged for the town's volunteer vet, Dr. Edward Lamb, to come by. Dr. Lamb was a thin man in his 60s with gentle hands and a friendly, slow smile. His hair was wispy and white, and he wore wire-rimmed glasses perched on a sun-spotted nose. He greeted Naomi with a quiet, "Good morning, sweetheart," then crouched to examine Rusty, murmuring encouragement. He ran his hands gently over Rusty's ribs, noting the scars, old wounds, and the bad leg. "He's a tough fellow," Dr. Lamb said, glancing at Naomi with admiration. "But he needs rest and food, lots of both." He gave Rusty a shot for pain and handed Naomi a packet of special biscuits. "These will help him heal." Rusty, suspicious at first, tolerated the examination only because Naomi was there, her small hand resting on his back the whole time. The trust between girl and dog was unspoken, but absolute. In the background, the low hum of voices from the main desk signaled another day in Millbrook. Marcus stopped by, setting a breakfast tray on the edge of Naomi's cot scrambled eggs, toast, and a slice of apple. "You eat. That's doctor's orders," he said, smiling. Naomi waited until he left the room, then carefully divided the toast in half, sharing with Rusty. Later that morning, a new face appeared, a young policewoman named Jenny Ruiz. Jenny was in her late 20s, petite and sharp-eyed, with black hair cut short and a smile that lit up the otherwise dull station halls. Her uniform was always neat, but she added a flash of pink nail polish and sometimes wore funny socks that peeked out above her boots. Jenny was known in town for her easy laugh and her way with kids. She'd volunteered at the local youth center before joining the force. Jenny tapped on the door, holding something behind her back. "Hey, Naomi," she called out. "Mind if I visit?" Naomi looked uncertain, but Rusty only thumped his tail once and settled back down. Jenny crouched beside Naomi, pulling out a small, well-loved teddy bear with one ear missing and a patchwork belly. "I heard every hero needs a sidekick. This is Rufus. He's been waiting for someone who really needs him." She set the bear beside Naomi, who hesitated before drawing the toy close. Jenny spent the next half hour just talking about her own childhood dog, about learning to ride a bike, about funny things that happened in the police station. Sometimes she let Naomi braid her hair or showed her how to fold paper cranes. Jenny's laugh was infectious. For the first time, Naomi almost smiled. Meanwhile, Marcus sat in his cramped office, calling every nearby town and shelter, sharing Naomi's photo and story. He left messages with social services and checked the missing persons database. Nothing. Each time he returned to see Naomi, he tried not to show his frustration. At lunch, Helen Applewhite stopped by again, this time with a bigger sack. Inside were 2 sandwiches, a piece of pie, and a note that read, "For the brave girl and her brave dog." Helen, short and wiry with a face lined by years of hard work, didn't ask questions or linger. She simply pressed the bag into Marcus's hand and disappeared. By afternoon, the rain let up. Naomi spent most of the day reading old magazines or quietly drawing with crayons Jenny had found in the break room. She didn't speak much, except to thank people quietly or to whisper to Rusty. When Jenny left for patrol, Naomi waved shyly, Rufus the bear tucked tightly under her arm. That evening, Marcus sat with Naomi for a while. He brought a deck of cards, taught her how to play Go Fish. She didn't win, but she grinned when Rusty tried to steal the cards from Marcus's hand. Marcus noticed Naomi always sat with her back to the wall, as if expecting danger from every side. As night settled, Marcus made up a cot for himself in the hallway. "Just in case you need anything," he told Naomi. She nodded, but her eyes lingered on the window, uncertain. When he finally turned off the lights, she whispered, "Thank you." Marcus didn't say anything, just gave a gentle nod. Rusty curled up outside Naomi's door, the sentinel of her tiny, fragile peace. Every time someone passed, he opened one gold eye, ready. But most of the night, he just listened to Naomi's steady breathing, both of them finally, blessedly safe for one more night. The following week in Millbrook brought the first timid hints of spring. The chill still hung in the air, but the dogwood trees showed the beginnings of white buds and the rain had washed the streets clean. For the first time in months, Marcus Turner felt something resembling hope flicker within his chest. He had spent his evenings filling out forms, his handwriting careful, every box ticked. Foster care petition, health checklists, references from the station, letters from Dr. Lamb and Helen. The state worker, Ms. Quinn, visited on a Thursday, a brisk woman in her early 40s with close-cropped brown hair, broad shoulders, and a direct manner. She wore no jewelry except for a battered watch, and her questions were quick but not unkind. She greeted Naomi with a soft smile, crouched to stroke Rusty's ears, and asked Marcus a dozen questions about stability, support, and the future. After hours of gentle probing, she finally shook Marcus's hand. "I'll recommend temporary placement," she said. "We want stability for children, not more change." By Friday, Marcus drove Naomi and Rusty to the yellow clapboard house on Willow Lane. The yard was muddy, but a crocus or two peeked out beside the porch. Waiting by the steps was Dorothy Turner Grandma Dot to her family and anyone who needed mothering. She was a short, round woman in her late 60s with wiry gray curls and twinkling blue eyes set in a face mapped by laughter lines. She wore a cardigan patched at the elbows and a well-worn skirt, slippers on her feet even in the chilly air. Dorothy's voice was gentle but held an authority that brooked no nonsense. She pulled Naomi into a hug before the girl could protest, holding her at arm's length to study her face. "You must be hungry," she declared, and ushered everyone inside with a flurry of instructions. The house smelled of cinnamon and tea, and every room was filled with soft lamps and the gentle clutter of a life well lived. Rusty took to Dorothy immediately, trotting at her side as if he belonged. In the kitchen, Dorothy poured tea, heated soup, and buttered thick slices of bread. She handed Naomi a bowl, watching her eat with quiet satisfaction, and gave Rusty a biscuit before sitting at the table herself. After lunch, Dorothy led Naomi to the sewing room. Racks of fabric and jars of buttons lined the walls. "I never met a child who didn't need a little color," she said, showing Naomi a bolt of bright red flannel. She measured Naomi's narrow shoulders, snipped and pinned, then spent the afternoon sewing a soft red scarf. Naomi sat at the table with her, threading buttons onto string and listening to Dorothy's stories about Marcus as a boy, stories that made them both laugh. "He was a scrawny thing with wild hair and more questions than the mayor at election time," Dorothy reminisced, and Naomi found herself grinning, shy but open. Jenny Ruiz became a near-daily visitor, stopping by after her shifts in uniform, her smile as warm as ever. She brought dog treats for Rusty and books for Naomi, alphabet readers, coloring stories about dogs who solved mysteries, even a picture book about a brave canine named Atlas. Jenny made learning a game, reading aloud in funny voices or showing Naomi how to sound out words. Naomi, at first shy, began to recite letters in simple words, pride showing in her soft voice. At night, Marcus cooked simple meals, grilled cheese, chicken stew, sweet corn, always making sure there was a bowl for Rusty under the table. He'd sit with Dorothy and Naomi telling stories about life at the station, the time Rusty snuck into his patrol car and ate his sandwich, or the stray kitten Dorothy once rescued and nursed back to health. There was laughter, sometimes awkward silences, but the rhythm of ordinary days began to root itself. Rusty settled into the house like a shadow always at Naomi's heels, napping by the fire or sprawling on the faded rug as she read or drew. The limp in his hind leg faded little by little with rest and medicine. His eyes grew brighter, his fur slowly thickened. At night, he slept at the foot of Naomi's bed, raising his head every time she stirred. On the third evening, Naomi whispered, "Thank you for not leaving me," and Rusty wagged his tail, nuzzling her cheek. Marcus sometimes watched the two from the doorway, heart aching and hopeful at once. He saw in Naomi's posture the same wariness he once carried. He knew how much work it took to trust that a good day would not vanish overnight. The days passed. Dorothy showed Naomi how to make biscuits, letting her flour her hands and roll dough on the old wooden counter. They planted seeds in little clay pots by the kitchen window, dreaming of gardens and sunshine. Jenny brought a magnifying glass, and together with Naomi and Rusty, they searched the yard for beetles and ladybugs, turning the hunt into a game. One rainy afternoon, Dorothy wrapped the red scarf around Naomi's neck before she left for school and said, "Now you're truly part of the family." Naomi's smile, quick, bashful, then gone, lingered in Marcus's mind long after she'd disappeared down the hall. The phone still rang every other day at the Turner House Social Services, the police, strangers with rumors. But with each call that led nowhere, Marcus felt his resolve deepen. He would give Naomi and Rusty a home for as long as they needed it, no matter how long that was. And every evening, as the house settled and the world outside grew dark and cold again, Naomi sat by the window with Rusty at her side, reading, dreaming, learning to hope that maybe this time she truly belonged. Spring's hopeful grip on Millbrook was still tentative when the letter arrived. It came on a Monday, pale blue envelope tucked among grocery coupons and utility bills, addressed to Marcus Turner in an angular, precise hand. That afternoon, Naomi was in the backyard with Rusty, brushing his thickening coat as he sprawled in the new grass. The sun felt good on their backs, a brief gift after so many cold months. Marcus watched from the porch, the envelope growing heavier in his palm. He waited until Naomi was inside before opening it. Dorothy sat at the kitchen table, folding laundry, her sharp blue eyes tracking every move. "What is it, Marcus?" "It's from a lawyer," he answered quietly. "A Richard Evans. Says he's Naomi's father." Dorothy let the towel drop. She never spoke about him. "She barely speaks about anything before," Marcus said. He glanced out the window. Naomi and Rusty were heading inside, Naomi's face bright, a blue scarf looped over her hair. He pocketed the letter, resolving to handle things carefully. Richard Evans arrived in person 2 days later. He stepped from a spotless white sedan in a crisp navy suit, hair cropped close to his scalp, pale skin drawn tight across high cheekbones. He was a tall man, well over 6 feet, his posture rigid, gaze steely and unblinking. As he strode up the walkway, neighbors watched from behind curtains, whispering. Mrs. Chan from across the street shook her head. Mr. Harrell, the retired teacher, muttered something to his wife. In a town like Millbrook, strangers always drew notice, and no one quite knew what to make of the sharp, unsmiling figure. Marcus opened the door, keeping his body between Richard and the living room where Naomi sat with Dorothy. Rusty, who had been dozing at Naomi's feet, sprang up, hackles rising, a guttural warning rumble building in his chest. Naomi shrank back, eyes wide and panicked. Richard's eyes swept the room. He offered a cold nod to Dorothy, then focused on Naomi. "Naomi, I'm your father. I've come to take you home." His voice was clipped, precise, carrying a faint northern accent. There was no warmth in it. Naomi pressed herself closer to Rusty, trembling. Rusty barked, loud and sharp a sound that startled even Dorothy. "Rusty, quiet!" she snapped, but the dog didn't move, his body blocking Richard's path. "I have legal papers," Richard said, flashing the letter with a hint of triumph. "I want custody of my daughter. I can provide a better life than this." He said "this" with a curl of his lip, glancing around at the simple furnishings, the sewing projects, the plates of homemade cookies cooling on the counter. Marcus studied him, all instincts on alert. "Let's talk in the kitchen," he said, motioning Richard away from Naomi. Dorothy led Naomi and Rusty to her bedroom, shutting the door gently and sitting beside Naomi on the bed. Dorothy's strong arms around her offered the only comfort the girl could feel. Rusty remained planted by Naomi's knees, every muscle tense. In the kitchen, Marcus read over the documents. Everything was in order: birth certificate, proof of employment, references from a law firm in Atlanta. Still, Richard's story was threadbare. "My wife passed last year," he said. "Illness. I've had trouble, but I'm ready to be a father." His tone held no grief, only irritation at being questioned. When Marcus pressed gently for details, what illness, what hospital, Richard grew defensive, dodging the questions. "It's not important," he said stiffly. "All that matters is that Naomi is my daughter and belongs with me." Marcus's jaw tightened. He'd heard too many stories like this, men showing up only when responsibility became unavoidable. He asked for time to consult with the authorities. Richard agreed, but not without a warning. "I'll be back tomorrow, with my lawyer, and if you refuse, I'll let the court decide." The door closed behind him, the silence in the house broken only by Naomi's quiet sobs. Dorothy held her, stroking her hair, whispering comfort. Rusty licked Naomi's hand, whimpering in distress. That night, Marcus sat with Dorothy, worry lines etched deep. "Something's wrong with that man," Dorothy murmured. "Did you see how Rusty acted?" Marcus nodded. "I saw, and Naomi's terrified of him. That says more than any paperwork." Word spread quickly. Neighbors gossiped on front steps and in the aisles of Helen's bakery. Some pitied Marcus and Dorothy, but most simply shook their heads and retreated into their own routines. Few truly understood Naomi's situation. Fewer still cared enough to take a stand. The only one who showed up was Helen herself. Every evening that week, she arrived with a fresh loaf or a bag of warm rolls, offering them with a squeeze of Dorothy's hand and a simple, If you need anything, I'm right across the street. Helen's weathered face was kind, her sturdy frame wrapped in a flour-dusted apron. She rarely lingered, but always made sure Dorothy knew she wasn't alone. In the days that followed, Naomi grew withdrawn, her new confidence shattered. She barely spoke to Jenny or Marcus, spent hours in her room, Rusty curled at her side. At night, Naomi dreamed of shadows-long hallways, closed doors, a man's voice calling her name. Each time Richard returned, Rusty planted himself between the girl and the front door, barking and growling, teeth bared. Only Marcus could coax him back, but even he struggled. Jenny Ruiz, seeing the change, began visiting more often. She brought coloring books and puzzles, trying to coax Naomi into the kitchen. "You know," she said softly one afternoon, "Rusty's the bravest dog I've ever met. He's not going to let anything bad happen to you, and neither am I." Naomi didn't answer, but squeezed Jenny's hand and pressed her face into Rusty's fur. Marcus worked late every night, combing through Richard's background. He made calls to Atlanta, quietly asking about the Evans family. But Richard's references were too neat, the answers rehearsed. There was no record of a hospital, no obituary for Naomi's mother. Still, until he had proof, the law was clear. Richard was Naomi's legal father. On the eve of the custody hearing, Dorothy made Naomi's favorite soup, and Helen dropped off a loaf of cinnamon bread. They ate in silence, the kitchen heavy with fear and the scent of warm spices. Naomi clung to Rusty, and Marcus promised her quietly, "No matter what, I'll fight for you." Rusty nuzzled her hand in agreement, eyes never leaving the window, always watching for shadows on the lawn. The Millbrook Courthouse stood at the edge of town, an old brick building whose white columns had seen more farm disputes and traffic tickets than cases of real consequence. That morning, gray clouds pressed low, the air thick with the threat of rain. Naomi Evans sat in a waiting room with Marcus Turner and Dorothy Grandma Dot, a worn teddy bear clutched tight to her chest, Rusty at her feet, his big head pressed against her knee. Naomi's face was pale, lips pressed together. She wore the red scarf Dorothy had made, the bright fabric a small shield against the grown-up world. Richard Evans arrived with his attorney, Mr. Parker, a man in his 50s with a ruddy complexion, receding brown hair, and sharp eyes behind gold-rimmed glasses. Parker wore an expensive suit and a perpetual look of mild impatience, tapping his pen as if already bored. Richard, by contrast, was perfectly composed, his navy suit crisp, posture military straight, eyes cold as slate as he surveyed the room. When his gaze settled on Naomi, she shrank deeper into her chair, Rusty's hackles rising as he let out a low, unbroken growl. "Control your animal," Parker said curtly, but Marcus only placed a hand on Rusty's collar and murmured, "Easy, buddy. He's not going anywhere." The hearing was presided over by Judge Loretta Jackson, a tall black woman in her early 60s, with graying hair pulled back in a bun and an unhurried, commanding presence. Her gaze missed nothing. Her voice was gentle, but brooked no nonsense. She had grown up in Millbrook and returned after law school to serve her hometown, well acquainted with the town's whispers and wounds. "Let's begin," she intoned, reviewing the case file. "Mr. Evans, please explain the circumstances leading to your request for custody." Richard cleared his throat, his words measured. "My wife passed last year unexpectedly. Naomi went missing shortly after. I have spent months searching for her, and now that she has been found, I wish to bring her home where she belongs. I can provide a stable environment, financial support, and access to the best schools." Parker nodded in approval. Judge Jackson listened, then turned to Naomi, voice softening. "Miss Naomi, do you wish to return to your father's home?" Naomi trembled. Her voice was barely a whisper. "No, ma'am. I want to stay with Marcus and Grandma Dot." "Can you tell me why?" the judge asked gently. Naomi's eyes darted to Rusty, then to Dorothy. "They make me feel safe. Rusty, too. I don't want to leave." The courtroom murmured neighbors, a few teachers, Helen Applewhite sitting in the back, flowers still on her hands. The judge turned to Richard. "Can you tell us more about your wife's passing?" Richard stiffened. "It was an illness. She died at home. Naomi ran away before I could get help. There was confusion." Judge Jackson's gaze sharpened. "What illness?" "A fever." "She'd been sick for days," Richard said, voice tense. "We never went to the hospital. No, I didn't think it necessary. Parker quickly changed the subject, presenting employment records, a list of private schools, and statements from colleagues attesting to Richard's stability. The judge listened, nodding politely, but her expression remained unreadable. Jenny Ruiz, in uniform, sat with a folder in her lap. She had spent the past week digging into Richard's past phone calls, emails, background checks. She had discovered neighbors in Atlanta who remembered shouting, broken windows, and nights when police were called but charges never filed. She had pieced together reports of late-night trips to pharmacies, receipts for painkillers, and a school counselor's note about Naomi's withdrawn behavior in first grade. Jenny stood to speak, presenting her findings. Your Honor, I believe further investigation is warranted into Mr. Evans's home environment and the circumstances of Mrs. Evans's death. Judge Jackson nodded. Thank you, Officer Ruiz. This court will require a child welfare evaluation and a coroner's review of Mrs. Evans's medical records. Naomi flinched as Richard's eyes narrowed, but Marcus squeezed her hand. Dorothy wrapped an arm around Naomi's shoulders. Rusty, sensing the tension, pressed closer, eyes fixed on Richard, lips curled in a silent warning. Outside, thunder rumbled. After hours of questioning, the judge gave her decision. Pending a full investigation, Naomi Evans will remain in the care of Marcus Turner and Dorothy Turner. The welfare of the child is this court's primary concern. Mr. Evans, you will cooperate with all inquiries. Parker began to protest, but Judge Jackson silenced him with a look. The truth will come out. This hearing is adjourned. Back in the waiting room, Naomi collapsed into Dorothy's arms, silent tears streaming down her face. Rusty whined and licked her hand, his devotion unwavering. Helen approached quietly and slipped a warm roll into Naomi's pocket, whispering, "You're braver than you think, honey." Jenny squeezed Marcus's shoulder, murmuring, "We'll get to the bottom of this. She's safe for now." That night, at the Turner house, Naomi sat by the window with Rusty at her feet, watching the rain as it streaked the glass. Marcus made hot cocoa, Dorothy baked a fresh batch of bread, and Jenny called with news that the investigation had begun. Rusty dozed, one ear always alert. The family gathered in the warm kitchen, grateful for a small victory but bracing for the battle yet to come. The days after the court hearing crawled by, heavy with dread and unanswered questions. Rain fell endlessly over Millbrook, drumming against the Turner house and turning the garden to mud. Naomi moved through her routines like a ghost, clutching her red scarf, only ever fully present when Rusty was close. Marcus watched her with a growing sense of urgency. He'd promised to fight for her, and every bone in his body told him that Richard Evans' story was a lie. Jenny Ruiz was relentless, working late at her desk in the cramped police office. She sorted through old records, city databases, and handwritten case files from years ago. Her eyes stung from too many hours staring at faded print, but she pressed on. One night, around midnight, she found it. A yellowing folder buried at the back of the cabinet, labeled Domestic Disturbance, Evans, R. and Family. The notes were brief but damning. Calls from neighbors, reports of shouting, a police visit after a broken window. Each time, the case had been closed with no further action. The file was never sent to Child Services. The next morning, Marcus called Jenny into his office. He stood by the window, the weight of sleeplessness in the set of his shoulders. "We need more than rumors, Jen. Something concrete." Jenny nodded, passing him the old file. "I want to see that house," Marcus said. "We need the truth." That same afternoon, they made their way across town, taking Rusty in the back seat of Marcus's old Ford. Naomi stood in the doorway as they left, anxiety flickering in her eyes, but Marcus assured her gently, "We'll be back soon. I promise." Rusty, sensing something momentous, whined softly, pressing his nose to Naomi's hand before climbing into the car. The Evans house stood at the end of a dead-end street, shaded by ancient oaks whose branches scraped at the faded siding. The windows were dark and the front yard overgrown. Richard had left for Atlanta that morning, giving them their chance. Marcus used the spare key Jenny had found at the station recovered after one of the old police calls, and they stepped inside. The air smelled of mildew and dust. Faded photographs lined the hallway, Naomi's mother smiling in some, a tired beauty in her soft brown face and hopeful eyes. There was one photo of a younger Naomi, grinning shyly at the camera, Rusty just a puppy at her feet. Jenny began to photograph each room, careful to document every sign of neglect or violence. Rusty sniffed the corners of the living room, tail low, ears flicking. He seemed to recognize the scent, circling restlessly before bolting toward the back of the house. Marcus and Jenny followed as Rusty pawed at a door half hidden by an old bookshelf. Behind it, steep steps led down to a cold, unfinished basement. The air grew colder as they descended. At the bottom, a single bulb flickered overhead. Rusty's nose worked furiously, dragging Marcus toward a loose board behind an old workbench. With a determined bark, Rusty began to scratch and whine. Marcus crouched and pulled at the board, revealing a shallow gap. There, wedged in the dirt, was a delicate chain Naomi's mother's necklace, tarnished and still stained with a brownish-red crust. Jenny's breath caught. "This is it, Marcus. This is what we needed." They called forensics, who swept the basement for evidence. It didn't take long to find what they feared: blood spatter, fragments of torn fabric, even an old bandage pressed into the earth. The coroner's team arrived, led by Dr. Molly Keene, a tall, stoic black woman in her 50s with silver streaks through her dreadlocks. She had seen every kind of loss, but the sadness in her eyes deepened as she examined the site. "There's no doubt," Dr. Keene told Marcus. "This was a violent death. I'll have a full report for the DA tomorrow." While the team worked, Jenny took more photos. In a forgotten drawer upstairs, she found Naomi's birth certificate, a handful of birthday cards, and a set of small family photos. She pocketed them, already planning to give them to Naomi. As they finished, Helen arrived with a basket of food, her sharp eyes reading the truth on Marcus's face. "You found something," she said quietly, pressing a photograph into his hand. It showed Naomi and her mother standing outside Helen's bakery, laughing, flour on their cheeks. "They used to come every Saturday for sweet buns," Helen said. "She was a good woman, the best. You tell that girl her mother loved her. You hear?" Back at the Turner house, the news filtered in gently. Dorothy sat Naomi on her lap, wrapped her arms around the girl's trembling shoulders, and explained what Marcus and Jenny had discovered. Naomi's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time, there was relief. She leaned against Dorothy, Rusty pressed tight against her legs, and whispered, "I knew he hurt her. I just couldn't prove it." That evening, Marcus and Jenny laid the necklace and photographs on the kitchen table. Naomi touched the chain with reverence, tracing the initials on the locket. "She wore this every day," she murmured. "He hated when she laughed." Jenny squeezed Naomi's hand. "Your mother was brave, so are you." The official reports came in the next day, confirming homicide, not illness, as the cause of death. The evidence was overwhelming. Marcus filed the charges, his signature steady on the forms. As the rain washed the town clean, Dorothy baked a sweet bread, Helen arrived with a basket of wildflowers, and Rusty, the dog who had never left Naomi's side, finally stretched out by the hearth, tail thumping in contentment. The long darkness had finally begun to lift. The day Richard Evans was brought to trial dawned bright and brisk, sunlight streaming through the clouds as if to bear witness. For the first time in weeks, Millbrook's air felt light. Residents bustled past the courthouse, pausing at the sight of news vans and police cruisers lining Main Street. Inside, Judge Jackson presided with a solemnity that stilled even the restless. Richard, in a rumpled suit, sat with his new public defender, a thin, pale man whose anxious glances betrayed the weight of the evidence stacked against his client. Richard's usual composure had cracked. His face was drawn, eyes darting across the courtroom. The truth, at last, was about to be spoken for all to hear. Marcus Turner wore his dress blues, shoulders square, every line of his posture promising calm strength. Jenny Ruiz stood beside him in full uniform, her brown eyes shining with quiet resolve. Dorothy Grandma Dot waited in the front row with Naomi and Rusty. Dorothy's hair was neatly set, a string of pearls at her neck, her hands steady as she held Naomi's trembling fingers. Naomi wore her red scarf and clutched Rufus, the teddy bear Jenny had given her. Rusty sat at her feet, perfectly still and alert, a golden medal already gleaming on his collar. The trial lasted only 2 days. The evidence collected by Jenny and Marcus, confirmed by forensics, was overwhelming. Helen testified about Naomi's mother, her kind spirit, and the days she and Naomi spent in the bakery. Dr. Keene, the coroner, described the truth of Mrs. Evans's death, her words soft but devastating. When the verdict was read guilty on all counts, there was no celebration, only a wave of relief. Richard's eyes darted to Naomi once, but she looked away, her hand tight around Dorothy's. Afterward, the community gathered outside the courthouse steps. The chief of police, a large, barrel-chested man named Chief Morris, called the Turner family forward. Today, justice was served not just by the law but by the courage of those who refused to give up, he declared, voice booming over the crowd. Officer Marcus Turner, for your unwavering compassion and bravery, this department awards you the Millbrook Medal of Honor. Marcus accepted, his face grave, eyes shining with emotion as Dorothy embraced him, and Naomi beamed with pride. Jenny was called next, commended for her tireless investigation, and promoted to detective. Her colleagues cheered, but Jenny only smiled and gestured to Naomi. It's the bravest among us who inspire the rest. Finally, Chief Morris beckoned Rusty forward, the dog trotting to the podium with tail wagging, his eyes bright. And this, the chief continued, is our hero. He pinned a small medallion to Rusty's collar, Hero Dog, the crowd erupting in applause. Reporters snapped photos as Rusty sat proudly, tongue lolling, Naomi's arms tight around his neck. Within days, the story spread across Millbrook and beyond. The local newspaper ran their photo on the front page. Marcus, Dorothy, Jenny, Naomi, and Rusty shoulder to shoulder beneath the courthouse steps, sun gleaming on medals and smiles. Underneath the headline read, "Justice and kindness prevail, a town changed by courage." Animal rescue organizations from Atlanta to Savannah wrote letters, one sending Rusty an engraved silver badge and a box of gourmet treats, naming him an honorary member of their Hero Dog Hall of Fame. The Turner house soon buzzed with new energy. Helen and Dorothy, finding purpose and joy in each other's company, began hosting weekly baking classes for local children, especially those who had been through hardship. Helen, her hair always in a messy bun, and her apron dusted with flour, guided each lesson with patience and laughter. Dorothy, sleeves rolled up, led the children in songs as dough rose and cookies browned in the oven. Naomi became the official helper, measuring flour, teaching the little ones how to knead, and even leading a shy boy named Isaac through his first ever loaf of bread. The kitchen filled with warmth and laughter, healing wounds that ran deeper than anyone could see. Jenny visited often, sometimes in uniform, sometimes with her new detective's badge clipped to a cardigan. She and Naomi would walk Rusty through the park, talking about school, dreams, and what courage really means. Marcus worked his shifts, but every evening he returned home to a house alive with possibility and love. Naomi settled into her new life, her smile growing wider as she found her place, not as a burden or a secret, but as a cherished member of the Turner family. Rusty thrived, his limp fading as he regained his strength. Neighbors greeted him as the hero of Millbrook, slipping him treats and pats on the head. On weekends, animal rescue groups visited to share Rusty's story, teaching children about bravery, kindness, and the bond between a dog and a child who saved each other. On the anniversary of their adoption, the Turners threw a party in the backyard, red balloons, sweet bread, and lemonade under the bright Georgia sun. Naomi, wearing her red scarf and a wide grin, stood in front of her new family and friends. "Thank you," she said, her voice clear and strong, "for believing in me and in Rusty." The crowd cheered as Rusty barked, wagging his tail, never leaving Naomi's side. As twilight fell, the kitchen windows glowed with light, laughter drifting across the garden. In Millbrook, people said the Turner house was now the warmest place in town, a home where no one was left out in the cold and where the hardest truths had given way to hope, belonging, and new beginnings. Sometimes, miracles do not come as flashes of light or distant voices from the sky. Sometimes, they arrive on 4 tired paws and a trembling hand, in the kindness of neighbors, in the patience to keep believing when hope is thin. This story reminds us that even in our darkest hours, God works through the hearts of ordinary people, turning strangers into family, and pain into a chance for healing. Perhaps you, too, have seen small miracles in your daily life, a helping hand, a word of encouragement, a moment of unexpected love. Cherish them, share them. Be the reason someone believes that kindness and faith still move mountains. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment, tell us where you're watching from, and let us know if you believe that God still sends miracles, sometimes in the shape of a loyal dog or a caring friend. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss another story of courage, compassion, and second chances. And if you believe in hope, if you believe God is still watching over the lost and the lonely, write amen in the comments. May God bless you and everyone you love.